October is almost over, but thankfully for you, these scary stories don't seem to have an end in sight. Creepy weirdos waiting in the shadows and spirits that never moved on aren't exclusive to specific dates or holidays. Enjoy. At 2 or 3 years old, my cousin was kidnapped. At the time, they lived in a big city outside of the United States. He was on a playground with his brother and babysitter when he was suddenly grabbed and thrown into a van that sped away. Someone from the neighborhood that was already in their car tried to follow them, but the van got away. My aunt and uncle ended up filing a police report and were pretty much told by them not to keep their hopes up. Weirdly, by the end of the evening that same day, my cousin was dropped back off at the playground. When they asked my cousin what happened, apparently all the kidnappers did was drive around the city all day with him, gave him a bunch of candy and toys, and dropped him back off. I hike in a lot of remote areas. I was hiking in Pennsylvania, miles from anything, not even on a trail, just bushwhacking through the woods. When I come up on this guy about 200 feet away sitting on a log, just sitting there in jeans and a hoodie over his head, staring at me. I wave. He doesn't wave back. I start walking over, wave again and yell something like, "Wow, wasn't expecting to see anyone else out here." No response. I was getting a little nervous, but I had already committed to keep approaching. Then I start noticing rock piles and circles and things like scraps of clothing hanging in the trees. I get about 10 feet from him, and this friggin' pheasant takes off, scaring the shit out of me. That's when I notice it's not a man, it's a mannequin, sitting there, dressed up, surrounded by strange rock piles and things hanging in the trees, miles from anything. I hightailed it out of there thinking maybe I had come upon something drug-related. I have no idea. I was looking at apartment buildings, but I saw a basement apartment with a rent that was ridiculously low for the area. There were pictures, the basement was finished, looked professionally decorated, and even had high ceilings. I contacted the person and was at the house checking out the place before the end of the day. It was a husband and wife who had converted their basement for a bit of extra income. They told me the rent was so low because they wanted someone to move in immediately. After the tour, things got odd. After telling the husband I loved the space, he pulled out a lease and started badgering me into signing it right then and there. When I'm reluctant, he started knocking hundreds of dollars off of the rent, to the point that this apartment advertised for around $1,200 a month was now being offered to me at $600 a month. He starts getting more and more frantic and excited, telling me if I don't have any furniture not to worry about it. He and his wife would supply me with everything I would need. All I would have to do was ask, just sign the paper. That's when I noticed that he was actually physically blocking the exit, and that his wife was staring at me like I was a hamburger. I hightailed it out of there. Still feel like I should have alerted the police or something, though I imagine if people started disappearing, it would have been in the news or something. Right? I used to pick up my prescriptions at a late-night pharmacy in a bad part of town, because they always renewed early, and I likes my drugs. One night, a large homeless man asked me for money as I was walking out. I mumbled something about not having cash and continued walking to my car. As I approach my car, I look in the reflection of my driver's side window and see that he's been following me and now is right behind me. He has this hard, angry look on his face, and I'm a little chick. I didn't want him forcing his way in my car, so I grip my keys and turn around to face him. Right as I did, an old hoopty pulls up right beside us, rolls down the back window, and a German shepherd sticks his head out and starts ferociously barking at the man. Creepy bum takes off running. The two men in the front seat of the car. wordlessly nod to me, and peel out into the night. My dad was a grave digger as a teenager. Usually, they dug a grave in the daytime and were done well before dark. Well, my dad decided to go screw around with some of his friends and told the other guy he'd be back to finish his part. He didn't get back until sundown. So now he was stuck digging alone in the dark with a gas lamp. This was a long-ass time ago. He did have the company of the groundkeeper's little Jack Russell Terrier. So he's almost done working on the last bit by the foot of the grave, when the dog starts making these alternating growls and whines. He was so focused on finishing the grave and trying not to freak himself out that he refused to turn around for a good 10 minutes. When he finally did, there was a massive guy standing at the tombstone just staring down at my dad. He was wet from the waist down, and the bottom of his pants were torn off and covered in mud. My dad said he crawled out of the grave and ran like a bat out of hell. When he got to the road about a mile away, there were police cruisers with their floodlights on, driving slowly and clearly looking for someone. Apparently, the guy had escaped from an asylum in the town over and had waded in a few miles of swamps before walking into the cemetery. When I was 6, my parents' room was right beside me and my sister's room. I was a scaredy cat, always wanted to sleep beside my parents, although the one night that I didn't, something bizarre happened. Before my sister and I had went to sleep, we brushed our teeth, where my sister accidentally spilled water all over her pajamas. She changed into a new set, and we shortly went to bed. I woke up at 3 a.m., feeling extremely cold and confused. At the time, we lived in a country where it was hot throughout the year. We didn't have air conditioner at the time, so with limited ventilation, the room was usually extremely hot. Looking around, still feeling confused, I was able to hear my sister's deep breathing on the top of the bunk bed. Her breathing was in rhythm, and I didn't bother to check on her. I remember walking toward the door to move to my parents' room. Right outside our door is where our living room is located. A big gray couch is located in the center of the room, and there was my sister, wearing the wet pajamas, sitting on the floor in front of the couch. Her face was partly covered with her hair. Her hands were on her knees, where she was squatting while staring at me with a smile on her face. I vividly remember staring back at her and wondered, "Who's this girl? Is that my sister?" I was extremely scared and dumbfounded, remembering that my sister was fast asleep in the room. Although hard to deny, she looked exactly like my sister. I remember that she was really pale and had the same haircut as her. After a minute or two of staring, I remember running as quickly as possible to my parents, leaving the mysterious girl outside and a story to tell the next day. About 15 years ago, some Navy buddies and I decided to go ghost hunting. We had heard of this place where some strange shit would happen. It was a park near a beach and railroad tracks in Pensacola, Florida. We went there and found that it was a trail through some woods that would go toward the railroad tracks, then would come back to the main road about a quarter of a mile away. We went in and everything was dark but not too creepy. About a quarter through the trail, one of my buddies started freaking out about some dude following us. We all looked but saw nothing. We kept going. That's when he was knocked to the ground. He started struggling to get up. His eyes were bulging and he wasn't breathing. He was struggling and trying to get up but couldn't. He was even reaching for the wooden rails but still couldn't pull himself up. He even ripped 2 fingernails out of his fingers trying. We tried to help him up but couldn't get him up. This was odd because he was the smallest one of us. It was like he was being held down. His lips were starting to turn blue and he was frantic. Then in the struggle, my other buddy's silver cross fell out of his shirt and then everything stopped. We hightailed it out of there and never went there again. We actually never went ghost hunting again either. When I was 7, a man tried to get me into his car. I was riding my bike around the neighborhood when this older car passed by, then slowed down and reversed toward me. The man started off by asking me some basic questions. He started asking me if my parents were home. He then opened his door and told me he had a present for me if I got in the car. My mother and grandmother had already given me the whole stranger danger speech and what to do, so I immediately started screaming for help. The man's expression changed instantly into a mask of hate, and he sped off as my neighbors started coming outside. A year or so later, a little girl a few blocks down went missing and was never found. Still gives me chills, 37 years later. What about you? Have you had a run-in that left you feeling like you just escaped a nightmare? If not, consider yourself lucky. See you next time.